I am 23 years old, and I have a phobia of coming across dead bodies of humans and butterflies. Years later, after the incident I'm going to recount now happened, I still don't understand the purpose of it all. Before I start, it is important to note that almost all the people on the maternal side of my family have shown the ability to receive accurate premonitions of loved ones being in danger or trouble. I have seen it in my grandmother, uncle, aunt, and my mother when I was younger. So when it started happening to me after my preteens, I did not get alarmed. These premonitions are gut-twisting, throat-tightening, heart-racing feelings of overwhelming dread that can last anywhere between a few minutes to a whole day, rendering me unable to breathe until I come close to retching. These usually rare episodes were still bearable compared to what happened in late February of 2009 when I was 17. I went to an all-girls convent school, and most of us in our class were a pretty close-knit, having grown up together. In February of last year of school, we were busy prepping for our annual sports week. Those were the days when I used to have horrific nightmares almost every night. Just a couple of days before sports week, I had a dream at the wee hours of dawn. In the dream, I was on the third and highest floor of our high school building and saw two of my teachers at the periphery of my vision. The scene that caught my attention was the dead body of a girl wearing our school uniform lying on the floor, a few feet in front of me. She had curly shoulder-length hair and her body was bloodied and injured. As crazy as dreams are, I heard someone saying in the background that she had been mauled by a tiger. It was such a terrible dream that I remember consciously trying to pull myself out of it and wake up. And just as I was about to wake up, a booming masculine voice shouted in my head, "Your schoolmate is going to die." He said this 3 times, and I woke up with a frantically beating heart and very shaken. I lay in bed for a few minutes, then pulled myself together to get ready for school. I actually forgot all about the dream until I was standing in line during the morning school assembly, praying. The dream came to me in a flash, and for a few moments filled me with a feeling of foreboding. I thought, how was I supposed to know who was going to die, since the term schoolmate would apply to any one of the 1,400 girls in school? Then I shook my head to clear it and told myself to stop dwelling on bad stuff like that. Like many others, I had been conditioned by my parents and society to never think of dying or even talking about death, because we weren't supposed to wish ill of anybody. The conditioning kicked in. I pushed the memory away and totally forgot about it for the rest of the day. Later that night, at around 8:30 p.m., I got a text message from a friend saying that one of our classmates had been run over by a train at about 5:30 p.m. that evening. While she was hurrying to cross over the closed-off railway line because she was late for her coaching class, her sister crossed the line and got behind the safety barrier fencing. But while she was crossing, her shoe got caught between the tracks, and before she could free herself, the train had already passed over her. She died on the spot. My first reaction after reading the message was disbelief, and a strange reaction at that, because I actually laughed thinking it was a joke. When my friend retorted asking if I thought so lowly of her that I could crack a joke like that, reality kicked in. I started wailing. My parents came running in. And all I remember is that my crying was over in less than 30 seconds before shock and submission set in. Later, I sat alone in my room and thought back to the events of the day, trying to recall if there was any incident that had made me know in advance. And that's when the memory of the dream flashed. It shocked me more than the bad news itself. I kept thinking of the warning that I had received. I tried to remember every detail in the dream, and the curly hair made an impact. The friend who had died had the same curly hair and the same general features of the dead girl in my dream. I felt so guilty that I just didn't know what to do. I held myself responsible for having known it, but having brushed it off as a mere bad dream, when maybe I could have warned somebody, done something, anything. The guilt prevented me from visiting her family to pay my condolences like all my other classmates had done. We were a class of friends, true, but teenagers can be horrible to each other too, as proved by the disdain my classmates showed towards the twins. I won't proceed to explain possible reasons, because those are trivial. I was always friends with them though. I just couldn't understand why the next day at school, a few girls in my class made such a huge show of crying when they were the ones who had never said any kind words to my dead friend. For many nights after that, I would force myself to stay awake so I wouldn't dream of someone else dying and see them dead for real within the next few days. It happened again though, a few months later, but that is another story. I could still hear the voice in my head, and I was already conscious when it delivered the warning. It was like a blaring loudspeaker had been inside my skull. Years later, the guilt is gone because I understand I couldn't have done anything, but sometimes I do question myself if there was something I could have done. I need to know why I was the one who had been alerted. Some people have said I need to work on my issues with death. I have hardly a clue of how to go about doing that. The only thing I know is that I have no regrets because I had never treated her poorly and had never denied her anything. The last memory I have of her was her in class asking to check out a drawing on a chart paper I was holding. And even though I was exhausted and irritable from running errands around the school all day, I didn't refuse to pass her the paper. I just remember her smile while admiring the drawing, and that is a pretty peaceful memory.
I hated it the moment I saw it. The floor in the living room felt like a funhouse. It leaned to the left. In the bedrooms, you could see the soil under the house. The floorboards were warped and huge gaps allowed damp dirt smells into the room. The house was across the street from the elementary school, and it was tiny. My mom and dad had just gotten divorced, and we were on our own. My brother, my mother, 3 sisters, and me all crammed into a little 2-bedroom, dilapidated place, haphazardly disguised as a house. My sisters shared the one room with me, and my brother slept on the couch in the living room. Mom took the itsy-bitsy closet-sized room behind the kitchen. The house had an unnatural feel to it, but my mother signed a 1-year lease and we were stuck there. None of us wanted to go in the backyard. A huge fig tree was in the center, and the ground was littered with all kinds of festering things. The only good thing about this place was its close proximity to the schoolyard. At the least, we could run across to the playground there. My mother allowed us to do this after schoolwork was attended to and our chores were done. We never wanted to be in the rental home. It felt cramped. It felt wrong. The first week we were there, the bugs found us. They came in through the gaps in the floorboards, and we felt them drop onto our beds in the dark. It was scary and disgusting. Mother bought a can of bug spray and sprayed along the gaps, but the insects found other ways to get inside. I took to sleeping with the covers over my head. The edges of my own blanket would be tucked tightly around my body. I barely slept while living there. After one exhausting night, I heard the cries coming from the backyard. It sounded like a small child whimpering in distress. Looking at my mother and siblings, I saw that no one else was aware of the sobering sounds. The crying went on for around 10 minutes. It was intermittent, but strong. I walked to the back door and looked out. Nothing, just the ugly fig tree looming over the yard. I remember peeking out the windows on either side of the house. There were unoccupied office buildings on either side, but a small space separated the house from the buildings. I thought maybe a cat was trapped there, but I didn't see any signs of a cat. The sobbing and night cries intensified as the weeks went by, and I felt constantly tormented by the sorrowful sounds. I was afraid to tell anyone, especially since the sounds only seemed to affect me. One night I got up out of bed. I sat on the back stoop overlooking the fig tree. I waited. I was tired of the sounds attacking my head and heart, and I needed to see who or what was trying to get my attention. In the past, I pushed it away, but not tonight. I was tired of fighting it off. I felt ready for anything. I was very quiet as I sat there. My mother's room was just on the other side, and her bedroom window overlooked this pitiful yard. I stayed out of sight, hidden in the darkness of the night. It was a cool evening and winter would be here soon. I shivered in my pajamas and waited for something to happen. The fig tree looked more ominous in the dark. It seemed to vibrate with any other worldly intent. I tried to adjust my sight to dark, but it was so hard. The large branches of the tree were everywhere. This caused dark shadows to undulate within the darkness. I blinked a few times, trying to focus. Were my eyes playing tricks on me? It almost looked like the branches were moving in slow motion. I stood and raised an arm above my head. Had the wind picked up, but I didn't feel so much as a breeze. I wanted to enter the backyard and get closer to the fig tree, but I let fear in. Mistake. When fear grabs hold of you, you become helpless, and I was frozen where I stood. Shivering in the dark, I tried to be brave and stick it out, but I was close to bolting into the safety of the house. The air felt bad. I had a metallic taste in my mouth, and my head started to hurt. The first sounds made me jump. The crying had started again, and it was coming from the fig tree. Yes, the sound of a child crying. It was coming from the center of the tree. I could see more movement in the dark. The branches were silently shaking with each cry. By now I was pretty terrified. Still, I couldn't move. I had to know what this was all about. I watched the scene play out. This is what happened to me that night. As it always happens, I have the gift of second sight. Everything started to fade away and I saw the past. The scene unfolded in clarity, and I watched in awe. As far as the eye could see, there was emptiness all around. No buildings, no people, just rolling hills and valleys. I saw the weary travelers coming over a hill, and they pitched a temporary tent where the fig tree had stood. There were 10 of them, 6 men and 4 women. They looked dirty and disheveled. The day turned into night and they made a campfire. The women were thin and drunkards. The men were no better. I don't know if these were traveling misfits in society or running from the law. They were there in the middle of nowhere, and they were well into the act of getting drunk. I couldn't really hear what they were saying, but I saw it all from the stoop. One of the men was getting out of control and words were said. 2 other men stood up and a brawl took place. It was a messy, drunken mess of bodies rolling in the dust. The women were screaming, and one of the younger gals, she looked around 17. She stood up with a gun. She sobbed and cried for them to stop, but they paid her no mind, and the punches flew all around. The girl got too close, and I saw the fist when it hit her in the temple. She fell in slow motion. I saw her eyes take on a surprised look, and they went glassy. She hit the ground hard, her head bouncing off the ground with a dull thud. This seemed to stop the fighting amongst themselves, and they all looked in disbelief at the girl on the ground. One of the women ran over and stooped down to touch the girl. Her screaming rang through my ears. That one blow to the temple had killed the girl. The images before me were fading away, and I saw the backyard in the night. The fig tree was there again, and it was no longer moving. This tree was on the spot the girl died. Night after night I had heard the cries of a child. In reality, it was the cries of the young woman right before she died. I remember going back in the house and never stepping foot in the backyard again. We moved at the end of the lease. I didn't understand the reasons back then, but today as an adult I do understand. This is what they call a residual haunting, a memory in the landscape of a tragedy. The old house? It was torn down long ago, and a small office building now sits where the house and the fig tree stood. As far as I know, no reports have surfaced.
So, a little prologue is in order. I met this girl Andrea through a self-proclaimed shaman named Andrew. They were both in their early 20s and I was almost 17. She and I connected immediately. Andrew even said that we were reflections of each other. We both sort of abandoned our other friends for a while and became extremely close. We never did any Ouija together, but it was an unspoken understanding that we were both sensitive to spirits. We never bragged about our experiences, and there was never any pretense. It was simply a close friendship built on understanding and common personalities. At least, it was good for a while. She lived with her grandparents in a very old home in Grapevine, Texas. Andrea lived in the room that her mother had lived in when she was a girl, and both of them had a lot of issues with depression and drugs. Boy, you could feel it. The air was much thicker in that room, and there were strange stains on the carpet and the walls. The stench was unbearable, and I tried to help her clean it more than once. Only it seemed like the room wanted to stay messy. For instance, one spring evening after a rigorous attempt at making her room livable, we decided to walk to the nearest bistro and get some cream sodas. She lived in a suburb next to a very posh part of town, and we shopped there a lot. When we returned, we both paused at the entrance to her hallway. My eyes were frozen on a strange ancient black and white portrait of a man, or a boy. It was hard to tell. He almost looked like a half gremlin man with a squished face and a tuft white of hair on his head. His eyes were beady and he seemed to come out of the picture. Smoke seemed to surround him in the photo. I can't tell you how frightening it was. "You haven't noticed that before?" she asked, getting uncharacteristically quiet. "Yeah, I also never noticed how many mirrors your grandma has up." While I couldn't take my eyes off the strange picture, I also saw both of us in the corner of my eyes in the mirror to our left. Only we weren't the only ones there. There was a black mass entering behind us. "Who is he?" "My great-grandfather," she said, staring at the picture along with me. "I never really met him, but he hates me." She started moving down the hallway, her head bowed, and I started following, shutting my eyes tightly from the awful portrait. It wasn't just his strange appearance, it was the seemingly purposeful way he'd been placed in front of the long dark hallway, as if to look you up and down before going into the bowels of the home. When I opened my eyes again, we were halfway down the hall. My heart was beating in my throat, and out of nowhere, the black mass seemed to rush around me. I felt something chasing me, and then it pushed my shoulder forward as if it was taunting me. I ran into Andrea's bedroom, as she'd gone far ahead of me. "What the hell was that?" "I'm not really sure." She sat on her bed, staring out her window. "But never go into my backyard." I put my drink on her desk. The desk had been in her family through 3 generations. "Why not?" I knelt down at the end of her bed, my torso resting near her feet. "I used to go out there, even though I was always scared of it. I heard voices. They never said anything clear. It was just jumbled up whispers. So one day I went out there and found a dead bird in the far back next to an old tree. Then I went out the next day, and there was a dead cat in the same exact place. I didn't go out the 3rd time. I never go anymore." "But what's here, Andrea?" I wasn't unfamiliar with these things, but the activity surrounding this family seemed angrier than anything I'd ever encountered. "They love it when we pay attention to them like this." Suddenly, there was a crash behind me. My drink had been thrown onto the floor, creating a new stain. I got the distinct feeling whatever energies reside there preferred no one interfered with the messiness of that room. I just looked at Andrea and she looked at me. Things got progressively worse, scratching sounds from the outer wall along with a strange human groaning. It was too harsh of a scratch to be an animal because the wall seemed to shake along with it. After that night, I tried to keep our visits at my home, because when I tried to convince Andrea we should investigate and try to release whatever spirits were trapped, she seemed almost like she wanted them there, or was too afraid of them. More and more our friendship grew estranged. She started becoming angry and bitter all the time. Her room started becoming infested with roaches and I couldn't stay there at all anymore. Eventually we stopped talking, but I remember that night so vividly, and I often worry about her.
I'm honestly not sure if this will make the cut, because it happens to be a dream turned into reality. So here goes. As of lately, I've been driving my husband to work because of his high blood pressure. The medicine he takes tends to cause him to zone out a bit, He stays groggy for a few hours after taking it. Lately, he has been feeling quite a bit better, so we had a discussion yesterday afternoon about saving on gas, as our funds are getting a bit tight. So he and I both decided he would drive himself to work the next day. That night I had a dream. It felt so real. I would call it a vivid dream, as I have these often, and usually watch for signs to play out. He and I were driving down the usual street we take towards his job when we come to a red streetlight. We stop and he tells me he needs to switch seats because he can't see. I do the usual. I climb over into the driver's seat while watching the light as he makes his way around the back of the truck and into the passenger seat. The moment he closes the door, the light turns green and I wake up. But I will be clear, we don't ever stop in mid-traffic or switch seats while on the road. My usual is when I come to pick him up, I park and then climb over the seats. This morning, the same morning as the dream, I wake up early, go about my usual routine. I make coffee an hour before he gets up. He wakes up and starts getting ready for work. I look at him. I feel something is very off, so I ask him if he would like me to drive him this morning. He responds with a, "If you'd like." I turn around and continue to go about my routine. I still feel a nagging sense about this morning, so I ask him again, "Would you like me to go?" He then responds, "Yes." We head out, all was fine. He was feeling fine, and we finally turn down the street we always drive on, still not thinking anything about this dream. We get about 10 feet down the road and he says, "I can't see the road." So I ask him, "Do you want me to drive the rest of the way?" And he said yes immediately, which he doesn't do. He likes to stay on course, so he pulls over, and just as the dream played out, I climb over the seat, and he makes his way around the back and hops on in. I drop him off at work, and I'm about halfway down the street, heading back when I get this lowering of pressure in my ear. I consider this a sign from my guides letting me know they're with me. That's when I remember the dream. So I thank my guides for intervening and arrive home, and I receive a text from my husband. He thanked me for taking over the rest of the drive, because he suddenly felt he was zoning out, and he couldn't see the road.
Let's not beat around the bush. Some stories should not be told. In this case, I'm not telling it, just simply writing it. I'm not saying that it's going to be scary or sinister. It won't change the mind of any skeptic, just solidify their ideas and dogmas. But I'm not here to change anyone's mind. I don't care if it's believed or not. This is just one of the many things that happened to me. This story I'm about to write is, well, the focal point of all that happened. It is my burden, and I'm still waiting for it to finish. Or, to put it another way, for the end to arrive. It will be exciting to see what happens after. Enjoy, please. 1992. What a strange summer. I just finished primary school and heading for secondary school. I have, by this time, had 2 encounters with the supernatural, and I was very interested in learning as much as I could about ghosts. So I set up a club called the Ghost Club, Beastly Remains. Its occupants of membership were myself and my best friend John O'Reilly. This was to be his first encounter and my third. It is difficult to tell this story because an age of innocence for him and me was stolen after this. Too much happened for it not to have drastic effects. This day, date forgotten, felt like it would never end. After breakfast, John and I went about our business of collecting clues to a case that we were working on. It had started with me a year previous, and if we would have access to the net, it surely would have been an open and closed case. But when is anything that easy? I'm not going to tell that story. I'll save it for another time, maybe. So after going about collecting clues, we saw a crow with a cross attaching it to the ground. It was a very disturbing image. The crow was on its back, wings extended and a cross staked through the middle of its chest. It wasn't a clue to the case, we just found it on our travels, but it does need mentioning, because like I said, this day was the focal point of my experiences, and that crow was an omen of some kind. John and I headed back to his house and out into the backyard where our clubhouse was located. We started putting together what we had collected but came up with no definitive answer. Fed up at this stage of always coming to a dead end, I threw our findings on the ground and pressed myself into an armchair. Undefeated John sat next to me in his beanbag and suggested that we just head out for a walk. Not to look for anything, just walk. It was, after all, a nice day. A little overcast, but the sun came out nonetheless. John always wondered about the things that I saw. He was actually very jealous of my talent. He never understood why I thought my 2 encounters I already experienced were evil spirits. I didn't have an answer for him. All I could ever tell him was, "You know how they're good and bad people? Well, why wouldn't there be good and bad ghosts?" Then I felt it, suffocated, hot, in fact too hot. I started to choke on emptiness. I couldn't breathe. Then, as quick as it started, it stopped. "You okay?" John was standing beside me with a look of sheer fear on his face. Apparently, I'd started shaking and screaming. I don't remember doing either. I took a look at my surroundings to see if there was anything out of the ordinary. I was standing in the middle of a small, unused road, the factory of Martin Savage on my left, its fence boarding it, a 7-foot metal-spiked guardian, and a disguised cottage in front of me. "Come on, sit down." John was at my side, concern still on his face. I'm okay," I managed, yet my throat felt dry and scarred with heat. "Let's take a look at that cottage over there. Could be fun." John didn't protest. Anything after my sudden attack was going to be a relief. We walked towards the cottage. It was like any other typical cottage, except its front door was boarded up and the windows on the front were stained and boarded up also. "Come on, there may be a way over the other side," I said. I went around the side of the house and found footing allowing me to climb the side wall and use the factory fence as support on the way up. Once I got to the roof, John not far behind me, I slid down to the edge and peered over. There was a window slightly open just below me. Carefully, I let myself fall over the edge of the roof. I didn't want to fall into the needles below or break anything. Once I was on the ground safely, I pushed the window open a bit more, just enough for John and I to enter through. Once inside, the words vice versa came to mind. In the room we were currently in, there was a ceiling and no floor, and the other room had no ceiling and a floor. By no floor, I mean that we were walking along planks of woods on their edges, with 1-foot gaps between them, and we had to be careful where we stepped. It wasn't the most exciting place to be. The other room only had a fireplace and a front door and 2 windows. The one facing the factory was the only one letting light into the room, so we kicked back for a bit. I took my head into the fireplace and looked up the chimney. Surprise, surprise, it was dark and dirty. "Hey Rob, look at this!" Coming out from the fireplace, I walked over to where John was standing. There was a footprint, a small footprint. You could have counted the toes, it was that clear. And blood. I looked at John in horror. He had blood on his hands. "Do you think someone was killed?" I said. John only shook his head. It actually just appeared in front of me. "What?" Apparently, John had been standing waiting for me to come out of the fireplace when he saw the footprint appear beside him. The blood, however, was a different story. When he had entered, John investigated the room. He didn't find a lot except for the blood dripping down from the top of the window beside the only door inside the cottage. He pressed his fingers into it, thinking it could have been rust, but learning differently, and then the footprint appeared. "Lift me up, I want to see where the blood is coming from." I put my back against the wall, joined my hands, and lifted John up so we could see above the ceiling and into the attic. No sooner was he up, he was back down, jumped down from my hands in fact, and took off for the window. Not being a fool, I followed and ran for the front door, knowing it would take John longer than I cared to wait to get out of the house. Through all the excitement, I didn't hear the footsteps hobble across the opposite room's ceiling, but I did hear them fall to the floor we were currently occupying and start to walk towards me. Without hesitation, I kicked the bottom of the front door wide open and threw myself through, scraping my back along 3 nails, and then I saw it all. The feeling about 20 minutes ago comes back, but this time I could see it. I could see flames all around me, nowhere else. The room I was standing in was perfect. There were people in a panic around me. Then I heard myself screaming at them. Then it was over. The vision had stopped. It clarified what had happened earlier. The footsteps had also stopped coming towards me and I was back on the unused road, in front of the house. I waited to see John come over the roof, but he didn't. I waited and waited. It felt like hours, but in fact it was only seconds. Then I heard John. It was the most blood-curdling scream I've ever heard. It chilled me right to the bone. Then after another minute or so, John came over the roof and slid down to the road, falling with a horrible crunch. I rushed over to him to see if he was okay. He was pale white. His eyes were unfocused, looking at me but through me. I picked him up and started to bring him home. Nothing was broken, thankfully. He had a scrape or two, but that's it. All he could say, though, was, "Grandpa, I need Grandpa." I brought him to his granddad's house and knocked on the door. When his grandpa finally answered, John had come around a bit, regained some of his color. His granddad asked what was wrong, and as soon as I had John sitting down, I told him everything. He was sitting in a small kitchen chair when I finished telling him, and next he was raising his hands to hit John. I placed myself between him and my friend and screamed at him for answers. Why was my mate all of a sudden mute? What had he seen? His grandfather told me that about 65 to 70 years ago, he and his sister, mother, and father lived in that house. I was shocked. What had happened, however, was that his sister had just gotten a new dress and was dancing around the room admiring it. She was 16 and very beautiful, he said, but the tail end of the dress went into the fireplace and she went up in flames real quick. Needless to say, she died, and that is what I'd seen in my vision and what John had just seen. I'm thankful that I didn't see what he saw. We left his granddad's house a few hours later. John had come back into reality and wouldn't speak of what he saw. All he said was, "It's not finished, Rob." We went back to the house. I know, crazy, right? And John said that I was to wait here. I was in the middle of a pitch black road while he went into the house. I protested. He just said, "Wait here, please." So I waited. Time passed very slow. It was now nearing 11 o'clock at night and I was very hungry. Then, somewhere off in the distance, I could hear hoofbeats and the sound of a carriage. I looked up and down the road and saw nothing except pitch black endings. Yet the noise got louder and closer. I closed my eyes and started breathing deeply. I remembered the day and its events. I recalled them in my mind and opened my eyes. There in front of me were 6 black horses, a black carriage, and a black rider. They stood out against the blackness around them. I could feel the breath of the horse and the gaze of the headless rider. I knew what it was. It was the Bauer, the death coach. My time was up. I cried. Then the words came out of the silence and formed in my head. In. I started to step towards the coach when the girl slipped past me and sat inside the carriage. I was amazed. It wasn't for me. I was a witness. This doesn't happen. The Bauer appears only to those who it's taking. I was on a different level of sight. I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't seen it with my own 2 eyes. Then it was gone and in its place was John. He looked at me knowingly. "Let's go," he said. We went away from that house, not to return. Later, I asked John what he had seen. He didn't tell me about the girl, but he did say that I'm incredible. He had gone around the side of the house and felt sick. He vomited and then he came back towards where I was waiting and saw a bright white light around me and nothing else. He was unable to take his eyes off of me. I guess that was a good thing, because otherwise he would have seen death servants. After this day, John and I saw each other less and less. We were in separate schools, but we talked until the day he died. Our bond unbroken, but a rift between us that we couldn't speak of. I'm sure that the Bauer will be back, this time for me. I believe that more than I believe in anything else, so I wait and enjoy every day I live. As for the white light, that's my aura. I am content. The house is still there, but there are no residents in it. I like to walk that path every now and then. It leads down to a nice old-fashioned mill and an old train station. Sometimes I feel John walking beside as I travel down that unused but scenic road. He is the best of company. Hey guys, thank you all for watching. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit that subscribe button and join the Nightmare Army. I'm always looking for new soldiers in my Nightmare Nation. As always, I'd like to give a big thank you to my friend, the Sinful Savant, for helping me out with this video. Thank you so much, my friend. And if you guys haven't, please check out the Sinful Savant's channel. I definitely think you guys will like him. So anyways, guys, how'd your weekend go? I feel like it's been forever since I uploaded. I guess that means I had a long weekend. Well, I kind of did. I mean, I played Mafia 3 the whole time, Marvel Ultimate Alliance, and now I'm going to play Rise of the Tomb Raider, which, oh man. And I'm really sorry if my voice keeps, kind of cutting in and out like I have puberty. I'm really sorry about that. I've been coughing up a storm the whole day, and unfortunately, this is the side effect of it. I sound like I'm going through puberty. But, anyways, guys, thank you all for watching, and just remember, the best ideas always come out of nightmares.